The painting screamed. That was the only word Lenora Sterling could use for it. Standing in the center of her studio at 2 in the morning, with her brush frozen mid-stroke and her heart hammering against her ribs like something trying to escape. The canvas she had been working on for 3 weeks, the one she had titled simply The Prince without knowing why, had shifted overnight into something she had never intended to create. Where she had painted clean architectural lines and cold geometric abstraction, there was now a face. White hair like winter frost, eyes the color of a storm before lightning strikes, a jaw carved from marble. A mouth set in an expression she could only describe as the look of a man drowning in something invisible, something that ate at him from the inside out. She had not painted that face. She was certain of it, and yet the brushwork was hers. She recognized her own hand in every stroke, every blended shadow, every careful highlight along that impossible cheekbone. Her unconscious mind had been at work while she slept on the studio couch, she told herself. It was exhaustion. It was the residue of the exhibition deadline pressing down on her. It was the strange, cold draft that had been slipping under her studio door for 3 nights running, despite the fact that she lived on the 14th floor of a building with no exterior opening near that door. She reached out to touch the canvas. The studio window exploded inward. Lenora threw herself sideways behind her work table as glass showered across the floor, and when she raised her head above the edge, heart slamming, breath gone, she saw him standing in the middle of the room. White hair, storm-colored eyes, the face from the painting except alive and blazing with a cold, dangerous fury that made every animal instinct in her body scream run. He was dressed in dark clothing that looked expensive and old-fashioned in a way she couldn't articulate. A long coat, high collar, silver at the cuffs. His skin was pale as carved ivory. He stood 6 feet and several inches of absolute certainty, looking at the canvas, and the expression that crossed his face when he saw it was not fury. It was something much worse. It was devastation. "Who painted this?" he said. Not a question, a demand. Lenora Sterling stood up from behind the table. She was afraid. She was shaking in a way she was deeply annoyed about. But she had grown up in foster homes with people twice his size. She had navigated gallery politics with predators in expensive suits, and she was not the kind of woman who stayed crouched behind furniture while someone stood in her studio demanding answers. "I did," she said. "Who are you, and why is my window in pieces on the floor?" He turned those storm-colored eyes on her, and something flickered in them, something complicated and searching, and almost wounded. "You painted this from nothing? No reference? No model? No vision given to you by another?" "I painted it in my sleep, apparently," she said. "Which is its own problem. You still haven't answered my question." "My name is Cassian Voss," he said. "And that painting is the first proof in 400 years that my curse is breakable." The silence that followed was absolute except for the Chicago wind howling through the broken window, scattering her charcoal sketches across the floor like scattered promises, and Lenora Sterling looked at this impossible man standing in her studio with glass around his feet and devastation in his eyes. And she made the decision that would change everything. "You're going to pay for that window," she said. "And then you're going to explain every single thing you just said." Cassian Voss looked at her with an expression she would later come to recognize as the first moment he truly saw her. The corner of his mouth moved, fractionally, as though the concept of someone demanding he pay for collateral damage was genuinely new to him. "Agreed," he said, 3 months earlier. Lenora had been commissioned by a gallery owner named Daria Fenwick to create a series of 12 paintings exploring the concept of what she called hidden sovereignties, the invisible power structures beneath the surface of modern cities. Lenora had taken the commission because the fee was extraordinary and because the concept genuinely excited her. She was 26 years old with a BFA, a studio she rented on a sliding scale from a building cooperative, and a reputation in Chicago's contemporary art scene as someone with a technically precise, emotionally raw style that critics called surgical romanticism, a phrase she found both accurate and slightly unsettling. She had begun painting the series with urban infrastructure, power grids, water systems, the architectural logic of underground transit. But 3 weeks into the commission, something had shifted. Her hand kept moving toward faces, toward figures she couldn't fully articulate in her conscious mind. toward something older and more dangerous than power grids. She had started working through the night without realizing she was doing it. The painting she titled The Prince had simply appeared, layer by layer, until the face emerged from the abstraction, like something surfacing from deep water, and then Cassian Voss had come through her window. He explained while she swept glass, and he, with no apparent self-consciousness, paid for a temporary window board and emergency glazing service using a card that she noticed had no bank name on it. Just a series of symbols she didn't recognize and a chip that the glazier's tablet accepted without question. He sat across from her at her work table, which was covered in paint and reference photographs and coffee cups, and he was so completely out of place in her studio that he became, in a strange way, the most vivid thing in it. The vampire courts, he told her, were real. They were old. The one governing the North American interior was based beneath Chicago, in a series of connected structures that had been built, expanded, and rebuilt across 4 centuries beneath the existing human city, predating the current urban grid by 200 years. He was its prince, heir to a bloodline that stretched back to the original European covenant that had established the terms of coexistence between vampire society and the human world above. His father, the reigning sovereign, was called Valdric the Grey, a title that was both descriptive and a warning. His mother had died when Cassian was 3 centuries old, which still meant his grief was personal and present in the way he said it. The curse, he said, had been placed on him 140 years ago by a blood mage named Zeravel, who had served the court as an advisor before betraying it in an act of political treachery that had reshaped the alliances of 3 vampire nations. Zeravel had wanted the throne. Cassian had uncovered the plot before it could succeed. In retribution, Zeravel had done the one thing more painful than killing the prince. He had cursed him with something called the Drowning Seal, an ancient vow-bound enchantment that worked slowly over decades and centuries, eating at the subject's ability to connect to their own nature. For a vampire, their nature was their power, their identity, their capacity to feed, to compel, to claim territory, to be recognized by the court as legitimate. The Drowning Seal didn't kill, it unmade. For 140 years, Cassian Voss had been slowly losing himself. And the painting, Lenora said, because she needed to understand the logical mechanism, not just the Gothic enormity of it. Cassian looked at the canvas. In her studio light, it was even more striking than it had been in the dark. The face emerging from layered abstraction, the expression of a man submerged in something invisible fighting the surface. Zeravel's curse can only be broken by an act of pure, unprompted creation, he said. Not by force, not by counterspell. It was designed to be unbreakable precisely because no vampire could break it. We do not create in the way humans do. We preserve, we accumulate, we govern. But we do not make something from nothing that has never existed before. He paused. The curse requires that someone who has never met me, never been shown a likeness of me, and has received no instruction or compulsion, must see me as I truly am and render that vision in a permanent medium. The act of being genuinely witnessed, he said, and made visible by an unconditioned eye, breaks the seal. Lenora looked at the painting, then at him. You're saying I accidentally did it. You began it, he said carefully. The seal reads the intent of the work, not just its completion. Your painting is extraordinarily accurate, which tells me your connection to the working is genuine. But the curse requires the painting to be finished with the same intentionality as it was begun. You would need to complete it consciously, knowing what it is, seeing me clearly, and if I finish it, the Drowning Seal breaks. He said it simply, but the quality of his voice when he said it was the most naked thing she had heard from him, a raw edge beneath all that ancient, aristocratic composure. What's the catch, she said. He looked at her. The last person Zeravel permitted to come close to breaking the seal was killed, because others in the court have reasons to want me to remain cursed. Lenora set down her brush. So finishing this painting puts me in danger. Yes, from vampires who want your curse to continue. Yes. She looked at the face on the canvas again, then at the real one across the work table. They were the same, and they were entirely different, because the real one had something the painted one hadn't captured yet. The weight of 140 years of slow erasure behind the eyes, and the terrible, careful hope of someone who had stopped hoping a long time ago and could not quite manage to stop again. "I'm going to need more cadmium white," she said, "and you're going to need to sit still." What followed was not simple, and it was not safe, and it was nothing that Lenora would have chosen if she had been given the full information up front and a reasonable amount of time to weigh her options in a calm environment. But she was not given that because the world, in her experience, did not work that way. It moved fast and chaotic, and demanded that you make decisions in the dark with incomplete information, and the only thing you could do was know your own mind well enough to trust your own choices. She knew her own mind. She trusted this. Cassian came to her studio every night for 2 weeks. He came after midnight, which she initially thought was dramatic, but which he explained with simple practicality. The court's business operated on a nocturnal schedule, and his absence during the day was unremarkable, but his absence at night would draw attention. He used the stairs, not the window, after the first night. He sat in the chair she cleared of reference books and print-outs, a battered wooden thing that had belonged to every previous occupant of the studio, and he was so completely incongruous in it, this ancient, aristocratic, white-haired creature of the dark in a chair that had held hungover graduate students, that Lenora found herself laughing about it more than once, which seemed to genuinely surprise him. He was not easy to paint, not because he was difficult to look at. He was extraordinarily striking, in the way of something that has no need to soften itself for easiest consumption, but because the truth of him kept shifting as she understood him better. The face she had painted in her sleep had been accurate in its features, but had missed the particular quality of his expression when he was at ease, which was rare, but happened in her studio in a way that she didn't think he was aware of. She kept revising. He was patient in the way of someone who has 4 centuries of practice at waiting, but she noticed that his patience with her specifically was different from his patience with everything else. He was attentive in a way that was almost uncomfortable in its completeness. "You keep looking at my hands when I work," she said on the 4th night without looking up from the canvas. "You keep doing something extraordinary with them," he said without apology. She looked up then. He met her eyes without flinching, which, she was coming to understand, was simply how he operated. Direct. Honest in a way that was different from bluntness, more like precision. He said exactly what he meant and expected the same. "Tell me about the court," she said. "Tell me who wants the curse to stay." He was quiet for a moment, and she kept painting, and the city hummed 40 stories below the broken and repaired window. "There is a faction," he said, "led by a vampire called Morthane. He is old, older than my father, and he has spent 2 centuries positioning himself as an indispensable advisor to the court while systematically weakening every competing power structure. With me cursed, I cannot fully claim my inheritance when my father steps down. The succession would go to a vote of the Elder Council, which Morthane controls. He would not take the throne himself. He would put a puppet there and govern through them." "And your father knows this?" "My father is dying," Cassian said, and the simple weight of it filled the room. Not in the human sense. Vampires can die of something called the long diminishing when they choose to stop, when they are simply done. He has been in that state for 30 years. He remains aware, coherent, present, but he is releasing his hold on the world, piece by piece, and the court knows it, and the politics have been in motion for decades around that knowledge. Lenora set down her brush. "Cassian, if your father goes before the curse breaks, what happens?" "The succession vote triggers immediately. Morthane's faction wins. The court restructures around his puppet, and the drowning seal, no longer politically useful to interrupt, would be left to run its course." He paused. "I would lose myself entirely within perhaps 30 years. My personality, my memory, my capacity to be who I am, would dissolve. I would exist but would not be." "That's worse than death," she said. "Yes." She picked up her brush. "Then we work faster," she said. Something moved in his expression that she caught because she was studying his face for the painting, something that opened and then closed carefully, a kind of recognition, as though he had said "I would lose myself," and she had heard it the way he had meant it, not as an abstract tragedy, but as something that mattered to her specifically, and she had not looked away from it. "Lenora," he said. "Don't," she said quietly, still painting. "Not yet. Let it be what it is for now." He was silent, Then in a voice that had 4 centuries of practice at not showing what it felt, "Yes, all right." The danger arrived, as danger often does, from the direction she hadn't been watching. On the 9th night, Lenora arrived at her studio to find it had been searched, not ransacked in the obvious dramatic way of someone who wanted her to know. Subtly, a careful, thorough, professional search that she only noticed because she had a system for her studio that looked like chaos and was actually precise, and someone who didn't know her system had put things back wrong. Photographs moved 2 inches from where she left them. A drawer closed fully when she always left it slightly open. The specific smell in the room, paint and turpentine, and the cold draft she still couldn't explain, altered by something that lingered like old stone and iron. She called Cassian before he was due to arrive. He was there in 4 minutes, which confirmed certain things about his speed that she had politely not asked about directly. He moved through the studio in a way that was different from how he usually moved in it, not the contained, deliberate stillness of the portrait sessions, but something older and more dangerous, a hunting assessment that reminded her viscerally of what he was beneath the composed, aristocratic surface. His nostrils flared once, and his expression went very still. "Morthane's people," he said. "They were looking for the painting." "Yes, and for you. They need to assess what you know, what you are to me, and whether you can be removed as a variable." He turned and looked at her, and the coldness in his voice did not reach his eyes, which were doing something far more immediate and personal. "Are you frightened?" "I'm angry," she said, which was entirely true. "This is my studio, my work. They went through my reference files. That anger will serve you," he said. "But anger is not armor, and I will not permit them to reach you. Do you understand? This is not negotiation. I am telling you that I will not allow it." She looked at him steadily. "I believe you," she said. "I'm not going to argue with your protective instincts right now. But I need you to understand that I'm not going to stop painting, and I'm not going to hide. Because if I do either of those things, they win the same way they'd win by removing me. The painting needs to be finished, so we finish it." He looked at her for a long measuring moment, and she could see him weighing it, the protective instinct against the reality of what she was saying, the desire to put her somewhere safe against the knowledge that she was right. "I will have guards here that you cannot see," he said. "You won't know they are present unless something happens. They will not interfere with your work or your life. But they will be here." "Fine," she said, "and you will not leave this building between midnight and 5 a.m. without telling me." "Also fine. And if anything at all, feels wrong, you contact me immediately regardless of the hour or what I'm doing." "Cassian," she said, "I agreed to the first 2. You don't have to negotiate the 3rd, because it's already obvious that I would." He stopped. The tension in his frame shifted fractionally, and he looked at her with that expression she was learning to read. The one that came when something she said broke through the formal composure without warning and reached the person underneath. "You are remarkably uncomplicated," he said, and it sounded like the highest compliment he knew how to give. "I just say what I mean," she said. "It saves time." That was the night she would later think when something between them stopped being purely practical. The painting progressed in the way that good work always did, which was to say, not linearly. There were nights when she added 30 minutes of work and changed everything, and nights when she spent 4 hours making almost no visible progress, but understanding something fundamental about the piece that couldn't be seen, but could be felt in the next session. Cassian learned to read her working moods with an accuracy that she found both impressive and slightly unnerving, and he adapted to them without being asked, sometimes talking, sometimes silent, sometimes bringing her coffee from a place she had mentioned once in passing without any expectation that he would remember. She learned him in return, piece by piece, because she was a portrait painter, and she was not capable of spending hours studying someone's face without also studying the person behind it. He had been lonely for a long time. Not in a way he would admit to, or had perhaps even identified in himself, but in the way that showed in small things. The way he leaned slightly toward conversation, toward the specificity of her attention on him, as though it was something he had been rationing for centuries. The way he asked her questions about her work, her history, her opinions. Not with the searching quality of someone gathering intelligence, but with the focused interest of someone genuinely curious about the interior of another person. He had a dry, precise humor that appeared rarely and always surprised her. He was careful with her in a way that was different from the protectiveness. A kind of deliberate tenderness that she suspected he would not have named that way, but that showed in the quality of his attention every single time. She told him about the foster homes one night without planning to, in the way that information sometimes escapes when you're focused on something else, and your defenses are occupied. She was mixing a particular shade of grey for the eyes in the portrait, a storm before lighting grey that she had been trying to get right for 2 weeks, and she was talking about learning to read rooms, learning to assess situations, learning to trust her own instincts because there wasn't always someone else to trust, and she said it as context for the instinct work, and only realized afterward that she had given him the whole architecture of how she had become herself. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You built yourself." "Everyone does," she said. "No," he said, in a tone that was gentle but firm. "Some people are built by others, by family, by institution, by inheritance of every kind, and the building is real and valid. But you built yourself from primary materials, with no blueprint. That is different." He paused. "I recognize it as it because I have been trying to do the same for 140 years, holding myself together against something designed to undo me. It is exhausting work, and most people do not understand what it costs." She looked up from the palette. He was not looking at the canvas. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on him before, one that was simply open, unguarded, in a way that felt enormously significant given what she had come to understand about how he guarded himself. "How long has it been since someone saw you clearly?" she asked. "Not about the curse, about him." The answer was in the silence before he spoke. "A very long time," he said. She held his gaze for a moment, and then she turned back to the canvas because she knew that what was happening between them needed space to be itself, not pressed upon, not named too quickly. She mixed the grey. She lifted her brush. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," she said, keeping her voice easy, her eyes on the paint. He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer, and then he said, "I still remember what it felt like before the curse. What my own power felt like, moving through me, clean and clear and mine. Sometimes, in your studio, I can almost feel it again. Not because the curse is lifting, I don't think, but because something in this room is honest, and honest things create space that curses cannot fully occupy." She thought about that for the rest of the night, her brush moving, his face emerging more fully on the canvas, with every hour truer and more present, until at 4 a.m. she stepped back and looked at what she had made and felt, for the first time, that the painting was close, very close. "Tomorrow night," she said. "I think tomorrow night." He looked at the canvas. She watched his face in profile, the storm-grey eyes moving over his own portrait, and the expression she caught there was not the devastation of that first night. It was something terribly fragile and alive, like something that had been underwater for a very long time, and had just broken the surface and didn't yet know if the air was real. They never made it to the next night without incident. It was the middle of the following day when Lenora's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was smooth and old and carried the particular quality of someone who had spent centuries learning to sound reasonable. "Miss Sterling," the voice said. "My name is Morthane. I believe we share an acquaintance." She kept her voice level. "I'm listening. You are an extraordinary talent, and I have admired your work for some time. I would like to offer you a commission at a fee that would be, to use the human phrase, life-changing. I would also like to discuss with you the nature of the work you are currently doing for the young prince, and why completing it may not serve your best interests as well as you believe." Her hand was steady on the phone. Her heartbeat was not, but that was internal, and hers to manage. "What kind of timeline are we talking for this commission?" A pause, barely perceptible, that told her he had expected a different response. "An immediate meeting would be preferred. I can send a car." "I prefer to walk," she said. "Send me an address. I'll decide if I want to keep the meeting." She ended the call and called Cassian. He answered on the first ring, which told her he had been waiting. "Morthane contacted you," he said, because he was quick and he knew his adversaries. 20 minutes ago, He wants a meeting. She read him the address that had come through as a text immediately after the call ended. A building in the West Loop that she vaguely recognized as a high-end private event space. He's offering me money to stop painting and presumably to tell him what I know about you. You are not going to that meeting, Cassian said, with a flatness in his voice that was not a request. I know, she said, but here's what I'm thinking. He contacted me, which means he's not certain enough of his position to simply act. He wants information, or he wants leverage, or both, which means the painting is closer to done than he's comfortable with, and he's trying to delay it through me rather than deal with you directly. She paused. So the answer is not for me to go to his meeting. The answer is for me to finish the painting tonight. A beat of silence. Lenora, Morthane's people will be watching your studio. I know. That's why I need you to bring whatever protection you can, and I need you there by 10 instead of midnight. I will be there at 9, he said, and I need you to stay exactly where you are until I can send someone to be with you. Cassian, I'm at a coffee shop in Lincoln Park. I'm fine. Please, he said, and that word, from him, with that quality in his voice, stopped her completely. She had heard him commanding, she had heard him precise, she had heard him warm in the careful way he had learned to be warm with her. She had not heard him say please like that, stripped of everything except the directness of someone who was afraid of what he was afraid of and not trying to hide it. Okay, she said quietly. I'll stay put. Tell whoever you send to order something. The owner gets annoyed. That evening, Lenora's studio became a different kind of space. 2 of Cassian's guard arrived with her at 7, both of them carrying that same quality of carefully and contained, ancient stillness, and positioned themselves at the door and in the stairwell with the efficiency of people who had done this many times. At 9 precisely, Cassian came up the stairs himself, which was, she had noticed, always deliberate. Always the announcement of his arrival, rather than the suddenness she knew he was capable of. He looked at the painting for a long moment when he came in, longer than usual, and she watched him look. There is a complication, he said, turning to her. My father summoned me today. She put down the brush she had been cleaning. Is he worse? He is aware of the situation. Someone in the court, I believe a member of Morthane's faction, told him that I am close to breaking the curse, and told him also that I am doing so through a human woman who has been given access to sensitive information about the court structure. He paused. My father's position is that any human who has been brought into court matters at the level you have been is bound by blood law. What is blood law? She asked, though she had a feeling she would not like the answer. Blood law requires that a human who knows the location, structure, and political workings of a vampire court must either be brought fully into the court, meaning turned, or must have their memory of those specifics removed. The removal is clean and harmless and leaves everything else intact. Only the court-specific information is affected. He watched her face. There is a third option under the ancient vow structure, which is that a member of the royal bloodline formally claims the human as protected under their personal sovereignty. That protection cannot be revoked by anyone below the sovereign, including the Elder Council. So your father could override the blood law? Yes, but he is asking me a question by presenting this situation to me through official channels. He is asking me what you are to me, formally, so that he knows what protection to offer. The room was quiet except for the city below. Lenora looked at him steadily. What did you tell him? Cassian looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him before, something that had no composure in it at all. Something that was simply him, the whole of him, without the careful layers he maintained. I told him, he said, that the answer to his question was none of his business, which is the first time in 4 centuries I have said those words to my father, and that you were under my protection unconditionally, the mechanism to be determined by the outcome of the next 24 hours. That's not an answer to what I asked you, she said. No, he said, it is not. Cassian. She crossed the studio toward him, 2 steps, close enough that she had to look up to hold his eyes. She had learned his height, his stillness, the particular quality of the air around him that was different from human warmth, cooler and older and electric in a way she had stopped being unsettled by, and had started, she realized, anticipating. What am I to you? Everything, he said. and the simplicity of it, from him, after 4 centuries of careful precision and controlled expression, hit her somewhere in the center of her chest like a clean, clear note. She reached up and put her hand against his jaw. The angle she had studied for weeks on the canvas, the line she had painted in cadmium white and chromatic black and every grey between, and it was nothing like the canvas. It was real and present and specific, in the way that only the actual thing ever is. And his eyes closed for a single moment with the expression of someone receiving something they had convinced themselves they would never have. "Then let's finish the painting," she said, "and then we'll talk about everything." He opened his eyes, covered her hand with his. The temperature of his fingers against her wrist was cool and certain and careful. "Yes," he said. "All right." She painted for 4 hours straight without stopping. Cassian sat in the battered wooden chair and she worked. And this session was different from all the others, because the thing between them was no longer something she was keeping carefully in its space to develop at its own speed. It was simply present, like a third light source in the room, and it changed what she could see in his face, changed what she knew to put on the canvas, changed the painting in the final stages into something that was no longer just accurate, but was instead true in the deepest way she knew how to achieve, which was the way that included the artist's love for what she was rendering. She worked on his eyes last. The storm grey, the particular depth of them, the impossible quality of someone very old, looking out from inside something very present. She worked in silence, and he watched her work in silence, and the guards outside the door did not move, and the city outside was the city, indifferent and brilliant and always turning, and in the studio on the 14th floor there were just 2 people, and 1 canvas, and something ancient and specific to this exact hour. At 1:47 in the morning, she set down her brush. She stepped back. She looked at the painting. "Cassian," she said. He rose from the chair and came to stand beside her. She felt the moment he saw it, felt it in the quality of his stillness, which changed into something else entirely. The painting was finished. She had painted him as he was, white-haired and storm-eyed and ancient and present, the face of a man who had been drowning for 140 years in something invincible, and who was, in this image, looking up toward a surface he could not quite see but could feel above him, the light of it catching his features in a way that was neither dramatic nor sentimental, but simply true. She had painted his strength and his weight and his centuries of accumulation, and she had painted the thing underneath all of that, the part that was simply him, that had survived the curse intact, that was alive and warm and real in the way she had come to know it in these weeks together. It was the truest thing she had ever made. The air in the studio changed. It was subtle, and then it was not subtle at all. A pressure, releasing. Something that had been taut and invisible becoming, all at once, slack. Cassian made a sound that she would not describe to anyone, a sound so private and so enormous that she looked away from the canvas toward him, and what she saw on his face was not triumph, not relief, not even joy in any form she had seen before. It was recognition, the expression of someone being returned to themselves. He stood very still for a long moment, and she watched the quality of him change, not visibly, not dramatically, not with light or sound or any of the theatrical markers that the situation might have warranted, subtly. The way a room changes when a window is finally opened after years of being shut, when the air moves and you remember that air is supposed to move, that the stillness was the wrong state and you had forgotten. "It's gone," he said, quietly, factually, in the voice of someone reporting something extraordinary in the most level tone available to them, because any other tone would mean losing composure entirely, and he was not yet ready to do that. "All of it?" she asked. "All of it." He turned and looked at her. His eyes were the same storm grey they had always been, and were also entirely different, clearer, more present, lit from somewhere interior that had been dark for a very long time. "Lenora, I know," she said. "You cannot possibly know." "I know," she said again, firmly, warmly, with the certainty she felt in her chest. "I know what it looks like when someone gets themselves back. I know what it looks like on a face." He was across the space between them before she fully processed that he had moved, which was impressive even given everything she knew about his speed. And his hands were on her face with a gentleness that seemed impossible for something that strong. And he kissed her in the way she would later think was the most honest kiss she had ever received. The kind that didn't ask permission but didn't need to, because the answer had been obvious for weeks and they had both known it. She kissed him back with the same honesty. When they pulled apart, he was still holding her face, and she had her hands on his chest, and the painting was behind them on the canvas, and the city was going on outside, and the guards were outside the door, pretending not to exist. And everything in the studio was exactly as it had been, and was also completely different. The blood law situation, she said, because she was Lenora Sterling, and she did not lose track of practical matters, even in significant moments. I will handle it, he said. How? By invoking the ancient vow of personal sovereignty and formally presenting you to my father as someone under my protection. It is my right as heir, fully intact now, restored. A pause. And by explaining to my father that I intend to ask you something in the near future, and that his answer to the blood law question will affect your answer to mine. She looked at him. You're very confident for someone who hasn't asked the question yet. I am realistic, he said with that fractional movement at the corner of his mouth. You painted that painting. You know what I am. You are still here. I am still here, she agreed. That tells me enough, he said. For now. They did not have the luxury of simply existing in the moment, because Morthane was still a variable and the court was still in motion. And when you are the heir to a vampire throne, and you have just broken a century-and-a-half-old curse, the world does not pause to allow you to stand in a studio and hold someone's face. Morthane moved the following night. He did not come himself. He sent a delegation, 6 elder court representatives with enough uncombined age to constitute a legitimate political body, to Cassian's residential chambers beneath the city, with a formal declaration that, given the prince's extended diminishment under the drowning seal, the Elder Council was invoking the ancient provision of capability review, a mechanism designed to protect the court in cases where an heir's capacity to rule was genuinely in question. It was, Cassian told Lenora, over the phone at 3 a.m. from somewhere beneath the city, completely and precisely wrong, because the capability review could only be invoked against a cursed heir, and he was no longer cursed. Can you prove that immediately? She asked. I can demonstrate it, he said, and she heard in his voice a particular satisfaction, the sound of someone who has been at a severe disadvantage for a very long time and has just had that disadvantage removed. But Morthane will challenge the demonstration. He will argue that the curse has merely suppressed rather than broken, that the relief is temporary, that the painting is a manipulation by a human agent planted by enemies of the court. A pause. He has been planning this for a very long time, and the plan accounts for many scenarios. What does it not account for? A brief silence. My father, he said. Morthane has built his entire strategy around my father's diminishment. He has been counting on my father being too far into the long diminishing to intervene directly. What he has not accounted for is the possibility that my father would choose to intervene anyway. Can he? He can, Cassian said. It will cost him enormously, personally. Coming back from the long diminishing, even partially, even temporarily, to act with full sovereign authority, requires a kind of deliberate reversal that most vampires in that state choose not to make because it is painful, and because they have already made peace with their direction of travel. He was quiet for a moment. I have not spoken to my father about this directly, because I would not ask it of him. But if he chose it himself, does he know what you won't ask him? Another silence, this one longer and differently colored. He has known me for 400 years, Cassian said. So yes, I expect he does. Then maybe you should go talk to him, she said, not to ask, just to be there. Sometimes the people who love you need to see you clearly before they can make the choice that costs them. He was quiet on the phone in the way that she had learned, meant he was genuinely moved and was deciding whether to say so. You should have been a diplomat, he said. I'm a portrait painter. Same thing, less paperwork. She paused. Go, Cassian. I'll be here. What happened in the sovereign chambers that night was not something Lenora witnessed. But Cassian told her about it, later, in full, because he told her things fully now, which was one of the many ways the breaking of the curse had changed him, or rather, had returned to him what the curse had been slowly removing, the capacity to trust, the capacity to be known. He went to his father's chambers, which were deep and old, and carved from stone that predated the human city above by generations. Valdric the Grey was, as Cassian had described, in the long diminishment, present but releasing, the way a very old tree releases its grip on the season, deliberately, and with a kind of immense and unhurried grace. His hair was fully white, and his eyes were the pale grey of early dawn, and he had the quality of someone who was simultaneously deeply here and very far away. But when Cassian came into the room, Valdric looked at his son with a sharpness and completeness of attention that had not been there, reportedly, for 30 years. "You are whole," Valdric said. "Yes," Cassian said. "The painting." "Yes, the woman," his father said. "Not a question." "Yes," Cassian said, for the third time, why this one carrying something different. Valdric was quiet for a very long time, and then he sat up fully, which he had not done unassisted in a decade, and the quality of the room around him shifted in a way that the attending court members would later describe as the room, remembering who was in it. "Summon the Elder Council," Valdric said, "all of them, and summon Morthane specifically. Tell him I use the words, by sovereign command." What followed was a formal court session in the deep chamber, convened at 4 in the morning, with every elder present because no one refused a summons under those words from a sovereign, regardless of that sovereign's diminished state. Morthane came because he had no legal mechanism to refuse, and because he calculated, apparently, that even a temporarily revived sovereign could be managed politically if the situation was handled correctly. He had misread the situation. Valdric the Grey addressed the Elder Council with full sovereign authority, invoked the ancient vow of succession, formally declared Cassian's curse broken and his capability review moot, and formally installed him as co-regent effective immediately. A title that carried not just succession rights, but present, ruling authority shared equally with the sitting sovereign. He did this in the correct, formal language, with the correct witnessed protocol, and then he issued a formal finding of conspiratorial conduct against Morthane, supported by 4 centuries of documented pattern that had been quietly assembled. Cassian would later explain to Lenora, not by him, but by Valdric himself, who had apparently spent several decades of apparent diminishment, doing the very specific, very patient work of gathering evidence, while everyone assumed he had withdrawn from the world. "Your father played everyone," Lenora said when Cassian told her this, genuinely admiring. "He is the most patient strategist I have ever encountered," Cassian said with an expression that was both pride and something tender and complicated. "He told me afterward that the long diminishing is real and genuine. He is truly releasing his hold on the world. But he said that before he finishes releasing, he needed to ensure that what he left behind was worth leaving. He could not let the court fall to Morthane. He needed to know that I was whole, truly whole, before he could let himself go." Lenora was quiet for a moment. "Did you tell him about me? About what you want to ask me?" Cassian looked at her. "I told him you painted the truth of me when no one else had done so in 400 years, and that this was not nothing to me," he said, "and I will say this exactly as he said it. I am glad you found someone who sees you. Everything else is negotiation." He paused. He also said that he would like to meet you, which, under the blood law provision of personal sovereignty, means he wants to formally acknowledge you, which is an honor he has never extended to anyone outside the bloodline in living court memory. "That sounds significant," she said. "It is the most significant thing he could offer," Cassian said simply. "I would very much like to meet him," she said, and there was something in her voice when she said it, not obligation or politics or careful navigation, but genuine warmth. The warmth of someone who understood loss and long holding on, and what it costs to love someone across the distance of an ending. And Cassian heard it the way she had intended it, and said nothing because nothing was required. They understood each other. Morthane was removed from the Elder Council and formally exiled from the court under the ancient vow provisions, meaning that he retained his life and his person, but lost all access to court structure, court politics, and court territory permanently. The 2 members of his faction who had searched Lenora's studio were similarly dealt with through the court's justice system, their identities confirmed by Cassian's guard, their removal clean and complete. The court underwent a period of significant restructuring in the weeks that followed, with Cassian as co-regent, moving quickly and precisely through every thread of Morthane's influence with the patience of someone who had spent 140 years developing the discipline not to rush what needed to be done correctly. He was extraordinary at it. She watched him manage the court through the accounts he gave her and through, eventually, her own presence in the deep chambers which she was brought into formally under the protection of the sovereign acknowledgement Valdric had extended. She met Valdric once. He was, as Cassian had described, present and far away at the same moment, a man of immense age who was choosing his direction with complete deliberateness. He looked at her for a long time, with dawn-pale eyes, and then he said, "You painted my son." "Yes," she said. "As he is," Valdric said. "Not as he was or as he would be, but as he is. That's the only kind of portrait worth making," she said. Something in his expression moved, a deep, slow recognition. "He will be a good sovereign," Valdric said. "He has always been." The curse concealed it even from himself. He reached out and touched her hand once, briefly, with the formal deliberateness of someone performing an acknowledged gesture. "You gave him back to himself. I give you my thanks and my blessing, which under our law means that what exists between you and my son is recognized and protected in perpetuity under the court's sovereign authority. No blood law provision can touch you without his consent." "Thank you," she said, and meant it simply. Without ceremony, he smiled briefly, and it was Cassian's smile, the same fractional quality, the same precision. The painting ended up in an exhibition, not the commissioned series, which Lenora completed separately with 12 large abstract works that explored urban power in the way Daria Fenwick had originally intended, and which received significant critical attention and sold for more than Lenora's previous 2 years of work combined. The portrait of Cassian she kept. It hung in her studio for a month, and then, because she was a portrait painter and because portraits are meant to be seen, she hung it in a smaller show at a gallery in Wicker Park, alongside a series of companion pieces she had made in the weeks after the curse broke. Abstract studies of pressure releasing, of surface breaking, of light in deep water, the visual language of someone being returned to themselves. Cassian came to the opening. He came in after dark, which was simply his schedule and no longer something that required explanation between them. And he stood in front of the portrait in the gallery with the same particular quality of attention he had brought to it in the studio. And people around him looked at him with the slightly startled assessment that very striking, very unusual people always receive in crowded rooms, without being able to say precisely why they were looking. A woman from a local art magazine asked Lenora about the portrait. "He's extraordinary," she said. "The way you've painted him, there's this sense of someone who was underwater and just surfaced. Who is he?" "Someone I know," Lenora said. "Are you in love with him?" Lenora looked across the gallery at Cassian, who was now standing with a glass of something he was not drinking in a room full of people he could have compelled into any behavior he chose, and was instead simply standing, looking at her painting of him. And she saw on his face, from across the room, the expression she had been painting toward. For weeks, the expression she had caught in glimpses, and understood fully only when the painting was done. The face of someone who was entirely present in his own life, who was here and whole and not going anywhere. "Yes," she said to the journalist, without looking away from him. He looked up, across the room. With that unerring accuracy she had come to take for granted, and found her eyes through the crowd, and the corner of his mouth moved. She excused herself from the journalist and crossed the room. "What do you think?" she asked, standing beside him, looking at her own work from his perspective. "I think you have made something true," he said. "I think that is the rarest and most difficult thing a person can do. I think I am deeply grateful that you aimed it at me. I think you should know that the 12 paintings in the main series are done, and the commission is complete, and I don't currently have a next project lined up," she said. "Which means I have questions about what happens next." He turned to look at her. "What kind of questions?" "The kind you said you were going to ask me," she said. "Near future," I think was the phrase. The storm-grey eyes, clear now, fully present, did the thing she loved. The thing that was never for anyone else in the room, the specific warmth of someone who had 4 centuries of accumulated careful composure and was choosing to set it down with her. "I asked my father one question before I left him tonight," Cassian said. "I asked him if there was any provision, any path, any mechanism under the ancient vow structure by which a human could be brought fully into the court's protection permanently without being turned, without losing anything of what they are. She looked at him steadily. What did he say? He said that the sovereign claim of consort which exists in the oldest blood law documents predates the turning provision. It is older than the rule requiring humans to be turned or have their memories removed. Under the original covenant, a vampire of royal blood could name a human consort under their personal sovereignty, and that person would be recognized as fully protected, fully acknowledged, and fully permanent in the court's eyes without any change to their nature. He paused. It has not been invoked in 900 years because most of the court forgot it existed. My father remembered. He was, I believe, holding it for exactly this occasion. Lenora was quiet for a moment, looking at the painting, and then at him. You're asking me if I want to stay human. I am asking you if, when I ask you the larger question, you know that remaining human is a genuine option. I am asking you to make any decision you make about your future with complete information, without ever feeling that there is a constraint you were not told about. He looked at her with that absolute directness she had never been able to paint fully because it was alive and present in a way that canvases could only approach. You are brilliant and strong, and you built yourself from nothing, and you see more clearly than anyone I have encountered in 400 years, and I will not ask you to change a single element of what you are. Not for my court, not for my bloodline, not for any ancient vow, not ever. She let the weight of that settle. She thought about the studio and the painting and the broken window and the nights of careful proximity, and the moment he had said everything in a voice stripped of all its careful composure. She thought about Valdric's dawn-pale eyes and the expression on his face, which had been the expression of someone glad to know that the person he loved would not be alone. Ask me then, she said. Lenora Sterling, he said, with a formality that was not distance but the opposite of it, the ancient courtesy of someone who takes the important things seriously. Will you remain in my life? Not as a protected variable or a political solution or a temporary arrangement, but as the person I come home to, as the person I tell things to, as the person I am trying to be honest with and am better at being myself around than I have been in centuries. Will you stay? Yes, she said. Simple, immediate, entirely certain. He took her hand with that careful, certain warmth she had come to know. Around them, the gallery moved and glittered, and people walked past this man with white hair and storm-grey eyes, and the particular quality of someone who had recently surfaced from deep water, and they looked because you could not help looking, and none of them knew what they were seeing, and that was fine, because some things are simply for the two people inside them. I should tell you, she said quietly, holding his hand in a room full of strangers, that when I started the commission series, I titled one of the earlier pieces The Waiting. I didn't know what I was waiting for. I thought it was the next gallery show, or the next critical response, or the next version of my work. I understand now that I was keeping a space in myself clear for something I hadn't met yet. She looked at the portrait, for something that needed a very specific kind of seeing. I waited 140 years for someone to paint me as I was, he said. I had stopped believing it was possible. I had made a fairly acceptable peace with that. A pause. Then you painted me in your sleep, and I came through your window, and you demanded I pay for the damage. She laughed. The warm, clear laugh she had discovered she could not contain around him, which had taken her completely by surprise when it first appeared. And that is the beginning of the story we tell. That is exactly the beginning of the story we tell, he agreed. In the months that followed, the court restructured and stabilized under Cassian's co-regency. He was precise and tireless, and deeply principled in a way that the court, having spent decades under Morthane's shadow politics, found first surprising and then essential. He was not gentle with corruption or with dishonesty, but he was fair, which was different from gentle and more valuable. He built alliances with the other North American courts on the basis of clear terms and honored promises, and the reputation he developed in those months was, as Lenora once described it, exactly what she had painted. Someone who had resurfaced and was not going to be submerged again. She continued to paint. She had a new series, which grew without a commission or a deadline, simply from the accumulation of images that wanted to be made. deep blues and strange golds, architecture that went down instead of up, faces that were old and young simultaneously. The critical reception was extraordinary, a departure from what critics had categorized as her style, something broader and stranger and more formally complex, which she attributed, in the interview she gave, to working through a period of significant personal change. She moved her studio, not far. The new space was in the same building, 2 floors up, larger, with better north light and no problematic window angles. She added a second chair, not a battered wooden one, something comfortable, positioned where the light was good and the view of the canvas was clear. Cassian sat in it, the way he had always sat in the battered one, with the settled, attentive presence of someone who has found a place they intend to return to indefinitely. He brought her coffees because he had learned her preferences with the thoroughness he applied to everything that mattered to him. He was quiet when she needed quiet. He talked when she wanted to talk. He told her, piece by piece, the 4 centuries of accumulated things he had never had anyone to tell, and she listened with the focus she brought to faces, the kind that sees the person behind the surface. She had dinner with his father once more, before Valdric's long diminishing progressed beyond the threshold of return. It was a formal occasion by vampire court standards, and entirely informal by Lenora's, which was a tension she had become good at navigating. Valdric held her hand at the end of the evening, in the same brief formal gesture he had made the first time, and said in a voice that was quieter now, and more distant, "He is different since you. He is more present in himself than I have seen him in a century. He is magnificent," she said, easily and truly. "And he is also deeply annoying about believing he is right, which is approximately 60% accurate, and I tell him so regularly." Valdric looked at her with the dawn-pale eyes, and then laughed, which was apparently something he did extraordinarily rarely, because the attending court members looked entirely startled. "I was right," Valdric said to Cassian afterward. "She is exactly correct for you." Cassian looked at Lenora. "I know," he said. Lenora smiled at the old sovereign, with his ancient courtesy and his careful love for his son, and said, "He figured that out fairly early, actually. He's smart like that when he's not being insufferable." "I am present in this conversation," Cassian said. "I know," she said. Valdric passed into the full, long diminishing 3 months later, in the deep chambers, quietly and on his own terms, which was precisely how he had chosen everything throughout his long life. He left a court that was in better structural condition than it had been in 200 years. He left his son whole and present and co-regent with enough authority to move cleanly into sole regency within the year. He left, his attending court members said, looking like someone who had completed the thing he had stayed for and was content with its completion. Cassian grieved in the way of someone who had 4 centuries of love for a parent and the particular weight of a loss that had been long in coming and still arrived with its full freight. He grieved with composure in public and without it in private, which Lenora thought was the correct order of things, and she was there for both because she was there, simply and completely, in the way she had agreed to be. She painted grief, that winter. Not Cassian's specifically, but its texture and color, the way it sits in a room, the way it changes the light. She painted it well. A year after the night of the broken window, Cassian came to the studio at 9, as he always did, and Lenora had been working since 6 and had finished a large piece she had been struggling with for weeks, and was standing in front of it with the particular satisfaction of someone who has solved a problem they were not sure was solvable. He stood beside her and looked at it. It was one of the descent paintings, the blues and golds, but this one was different from the others. In the center of the deep blues, something was rising towards the surface, not dramatically, not explosively, simply, steadily, inevitably, moving toward the light. "That is the one," he said. "I know," she said. "I almost didn't see it until it was finished." "What will you call it?" She looked at it for a moment. "I'm going to call it what you were always going to be." He was quiet for a moment in the way she loved. Then he said, "I have something." He put his hand into the inside pocket of his coat, which was still the long, old-fashioned, expensive kind, and produced a small case, dark leather, no ornamentation, and opened it. Inside on dark fabric was a ring, old, very old. Not ornate in the way of court jewelry, but refined in the way of something made by someone who cared about exactness, a band of dark silver set with a single stone that was the specific color of deep water, with light coming through it from above. "This was my mother's," he said. "She left it in a documented provision specifically for whoever I chose. It has waited rather a long time." A pause, that fractional quality at the corner of his mouth. "I am asking you formally, Lenora Sterling. Not as a protection provision, not as a blood law mechanism, as myself asking you completely." She looked at the ring, then at him. She had known this was coming in the general sense. In the way you know things about the person you have been building a life with, but the specificity of this moment, the old leather case and the stone that was the color of deep water, and the expression on his face that was entirely open and certain, and the most vulnerable she had ever seen it, hit her with the same clean, clear quality as when he had said everything that first time. She reached out and took the ring from the case. She put it on her own hand, which she did deliberately, because she was Lenora Sterling, and she did not wait for things to be done to her that she wanted to do herself. "Yes," she said, "fully and completely and as myself." "Yes." He took her hand and looked at the ring on her finger and then at her, and the storm-grey eyes were entirely clear, entirely present, entirely here, no drowning in them, no invisible weight, just him, whole and alive, and exactly who he had always been beneath the thing that had tried to erase him. "I want to tell you something," he said. "Something I have been attempting to express for some time and have been composing in various forms." "Tell me," she said. "You did not save me," he said. "I want to be precise about this. You painted what you saw, you completed what you began. You did not choose to save me, you did not make a sacrifice for my sake. You did not love me out of some obligation to what I was suffering. You simply looked clearly and made something true, and the truth of your looking was what the curse required." He held her hand, which means that the person who broke the curse was not a rescuer, was not someone acting from pity or duty, was someone who looked at me and saw me, and made something permanent from that seeing out of their own genuine, unconditioned vision. He paused. "You did not paint me free because you loved me. You painted me free because you saw me clearly. The love came after from both of us, from the truth of being known. And that distinction matters to me enormously." Lenora looked at him for a long, quiet moment. "You have been composing that," she said. "For several months," he confirmed. "It's very good," she said. "Thank you. You're still insufferable about being right." 70% accurate, he said, which was an upgrade from the 60 she had given him. She laughed, the warm, clear laugh that still surprised her by existing, and leaned into him, and he wrapped his arm around her with the particular warmth of someone who has spent a very long time in the cold, and has decided, conclusively, to stay where it is warm. Outside the 14th floor studio, Chicago went on in all its enormous indifference, its lights and its noise and its constant turning, and inside. Two people stood in front of a painting of something rising toward the surface, and the night was long, and the world was complicated and old, and they were there together in it, which was everything. The painting went to a major retrospective 6 months later, titled after what Lenora had named it, and the critic from the national paper wrote that it was the clearest depiction of return she had seen in contemporary art, that it had the quality of something that knew exactly where it had been, and exactly where it was going, and that whoever the artist had been when she made it, she was no longer quite the same person, and the work was better for it. Lenora read the review in the studio with Cassian beside her, and she thought the critic was precisely right and entirely wrong about why. She was not a different person. She was simply more fully herself than she had been before. Which is what happens when you find someone who sees you clearly enough that you can see yourself in their seeing, and you recognize the person they're looking at. She had painted a prince free from the thing that was drowning him. He had, entirely without intending to, done the same for her, and they stayed, the two of them, in the old and new world where vampire courts met city streets and ancient vows met fresh canvases, building a life that was both of theirs and neither of theirs alone. Mornings were hers and nights were his, and the long blue hours of the pre-dawn were theirs together, and the studio always had 2 chairs, and the paintings kept coming, and the court was governed well, and the city above had no idea what moved beneath its streets except in the art. And in the art, if you looked closely, you could see it. the specific quality of something that had been in the dark for a very long time and had found at last its light.